Welcome, Rob Christopher, the director of Roy's World, Barry Gifford's Chicago. Um, it'll screen at the Music Box Theater this coming Saturday afternoon as part of the 8th Annual Chicago Critics Film Festival. And I'm really excited to talk to you about this. How you doing, Rob?
Doing great. Really excited to finally be able to share the movie with Chicago. It's been a long wait.
Well, we'll talk more about the specifics of the screening toward the end of the show, but I want to start off with a bit of a confession. Before I watched your documentary, I was not familiar with Barry Gifford. I have not seen the films he made, that David Lynch made based on his works, Wild at Heart, Lost Highway. I know, blasphemy. My knowledge of David Lynch is limited to The Elephant Man, Dune, and what else? There was another one, and I'm totally lost it right now. Oh, Eraserhead, of course. So, but yeah, Wild at Heart and Lost Highways are ones I need to scratch off my bucket list, especially now that I know that they were, based on works from Barry Gifford, who I went out and I bought a collection of his short stories, and I started pouring through that, kind of coinciding with watching the documentary. And much like a film I also saw at the Music Box like 9 years ago called Bukowski Born Into This, going in completely cold, I came out of the film completely switched on and wanting to devour everything that I can about Barry Gifford. So let me start off by asking you, what's your history with Gifford's writing, and what inspired you to make a documentary about him and his connection to Chicago?
Well, first, it's very gratifying to hear your reaction because I really did make this film for people who don't know about Barry Gifford. I feel like more people should know about him, especially more people in Chicago should know about him. He's an amazing writer, and the Roy stories, which my film is sort of centered on, really do capture a wonderfully rich, complex time in Chicago history. I first came aware of his work because I was a huge David Lynch fan, starting from when I saw Twin Peaks in 8th grade. So later on, when Wild at Heart came out, I realized that it was based on this novel by Barry Gifford. And I read the book, and a lot of the really weird stuff from the movie is actually straight from the book, which surprised me. And then later on, Lost Highway came out. I was a huge fan of that. It wasn't until a little bit later that I realized that Barry had this whole other kind of work, which was kind of a more gentle, introspective type of work, all based on his childhood growing up in Chicago, basically from the late 40s to the early 60s. Later on, I interviewed him for the blog Chicagoist, who I was writing for at the time. We just did a straight interview and sort of kept in touch. And next thing you know, I'm making a feature-length documentary about it.
Now, have other people tried to make a film about him, or is this new territory you're charting?
There have been a couple previous films. There was one which was sort of a Barry Gifford tour of New Orleans, because New Orleans plays a big role in some of his Sailor and Lula books and some of the other sort of wild, violent noir books that he's written. But that's really a much different thing, because that really is sort of a standard, kind of a talking heads documentary. Not to take away from it, but that's not what I wanted to do with my film. I really wanted it to be centered on that time and place, and to not have any talking heads, not to have the sort of celebrity endorsements that you see in a lot of other documentaries. Just sort of parachute you directly into this time and place and let you sort of marinate in that atmosphere.
It is a very different kind of documentary, and I want to ask you. You had this relationship with Barry Gifford, as you mentioned, that kind of sprung out of this interview. What was his reaction when you approached him to make a documentary about this particular aspect of his life? Was he at all hesitant because he'd, possibly been through this before with other filmmakers, or was he open to it? Did he have to do any prodding?
Well, based on what my conception was, which was, I said, Barry, I don't want to sit you behind a desk and have you just reminisce about the good old days in the 40s and 50s. I didn't want it to be that kind of a documentary. In fact, I said, I really just want it to be your voice and the stories and archival materials from the period. That's what I want it to be. And once he heard that, he was just totally supportive, totally on board. He didn't try to micromanage the project or, push it in a certain direction. He really was very trusting of me, and I am forever grateful for that, because it did allow me to sort of find my way into that period my own way.
And speaking of finding your own way into that period, something that sticks out almost immediately, besides the beautiful archival footage of 50s and 60s Chicago, there are some animated sequences which are unlike a lot of, sometimes documentaries will put animations into their films, but there's such a wide variety of styles and insane craftsmanship that goes into Roy's world. Was that part of your initial conception? Did you know a bunch of artists or animators that you thought, oh, I could recruit them to put this kind of a film together? Did you scout out for it? How did that how the artistry of this film come together?
It was absolutely not on my mind when I first conceived of this project. In my naivete, when I was first looking at the stories, I was trying to find maybe I'll make a short dramatic film of some of the stories, and I couldn't find a way to make it work creatively. So I said, oh, I know, I'll make a documentary. It'll be so much easier. It was not. I really didn't think about animation until maybe a year and a half into the project. There's a programmer who's actually now, I think he's running the Denver Film Festival, Matthew Campbell. Denver Film Festival screened my first film, Pause of the Clock. And I was kind of telling him about what my next project might be. And he said, oh, well, maybe you should think about doing some animation. I've seen some documentaries use that in a cool way. And that just sort of stuck in my mind. And I realized that there were at least a couple stories that I really wanted to present in their entirety, right? And doing a standalone kind of animated segment I thought would be perfect for that. So then I started asking around some of my friends and colleagues in the filmmaking world. Lili Taylor came my way. And then later on, she actually recommended Kevin Eskew, who did the second animated segment, Bad Girls. And I just love the way that their styles are, really different from each other. So there is a real contrast between this sort of black and white, dreamy kind of a style and this sort of like almost psychedelic stream of consciousness, color collage cutout style later on in the film.
I'm going to go back to Bukowski for a second, because after I saw that documentary, absorbed most of his works. I don't think you can maybe see them, but the top shelf back there is pretty much all Bukowski. But he would do these little doodles in his books, but I don't know that he ever considered himself really an artist. There appear to be some Barry Gifford sketches throughout the film, very just like portraits made out of sticks. And there's that one animated sequence in which you tell the story of, or I guess he tells the story, that the film helps illustrate the story of a young Barry and his mother who had just divorced from Barry's father, going to a drugstore, and there is well referred to as a horrible case of mistaken identity. And that's all rendered in a style that's very reminiscent of, I was thinking of those kind of stick portraits. The lines are a bit more, fluid, but was that at all an inspiration for that particular animated sequence?
Yeah, it definitely was. Barry has been doing art and sketches for decades now. his his preferred medium is Sharpie on white paper, and so a lot of the character sketches in the various Roy's World books kind of give little, thumbnail portrait of some of the characters. So I showed some of those to Lili, and we agreed that that would be a really cool starting point, but that it would be better, for her to do her own thing, which she did. And I like the fact that there's sort of, there's sort of a connection between them, but she's not trying to imitate his drawing style at all.
Right. For me as an audience member is reminiscent of that. And that's why I wondered if there was a connection there, if it just happened to be a coincidence. It's beautiful stuff. In addition to, painting a really kind of haunting story, the animation itself, even though it's, very kind of broken apart, it moves just like you're watching some of the archival footage that you open up the movie with. Your brain fills in a lot of those gaps. It's truly like a magic trick. In developing those animated sequences, did you work with the animators? Did you kind of go through the entire process with them? Did you make edits or suggest things, or did you say, "Here's the story, go off and bring me some magic"?
Well, what I really learned during making this film is, when you're finding your collaborators, it's really the same as finding the cast of your film. It's finding exactly the right person who can bring exactly the right perspective and artistry to whatever their role in the movie is. So I knew that Lili had a certain style, and I knew that Kevin Eskew had a certain style. So I would make little suggestions. I would push them in certain areas, but as far as things being storyboarded out, not really. I would, they had the recordings in both cases performed by Lili Taylor to work from, which was a big inspiration. Just the timbre of her voice and the character in her voice, and of course the stories themselves. So I would make little suggestions, but I was really just content to let them do their thing because they were doing it so well.
Now, speaking of the voices, as you mentioned, it's not just Barry Gifford, it's Lili Taylor. We also have Willem Dafoe and Matt Dillon. Tell me about how they came to be involved in the picture. And was it a matter of you just loved their voices? Did they have some kind of a connection to Barry, or how did you get them involved?
Well, of course, Willem Dafoe is unforgettable in Wild at Heart, playing Bobby Peru, who's one of the slimiest, most reprehensible villains in cinematic history.
Which I would know if I'd actually watched the movie. I apologize.
Highly recommended. Highly recommended.
It's on the list.
Anyhow, so Willem and Barry have basically been close friends since Wild at Heart. And separately, Matt Dillon, when he made his directorial debut with this wonderful film called City of Ghosts, that was co-written with Barry. So they both already knew and loved his work. So once Barry was excited about the project and the direction it was going in, he was very happy to call them up and say, "Hey, would you record some stories for the movie?" So I really lucked out is the short answer.
Was it a matter of, did he decide that that'd be cool for them to read some parts, or because a few minutes ago we were talking about you thought it'd be a good idea for Barry to kind of tell his own stories, read his own works and his own words. So was that something that he came up with, or did you suggest maybe we should get some other voices to read from the works?
That had always been my conception. I hadn't really been thinking of what actors to use. That was really kind of his idea. But I knew that I wanted his voice to be the sort of connective tissue between the stories, to sort of fill in more of his personal story and also tell about what Chicago was like at the time. So I knew that if I recorded enough of the stories and I recorded enough of his thoughts of what it was like to grow up during that period, that somehow I could fashion a skeleton that I could, hang all of these other things off of.
Now, the research that went into this, I watched this, movie from beginning all the way through to the very end of the end credits. And one of the things I noticed, there's a ton of, thanks to archival organizations, historical foundations and things. Tell me what it was like digging in to build this portrait of Chicago, springing up from Gifford's words. It seems to me that that would almost be a more gargantuan task than just translating the stories.
It was just wonderful. I mean, there's so much amazing stuff from that period, images and footage and advertisements. And I mean, the amount of material was, it was endless, really. At a certain point, I realized I had to stop looking for the perfect thing and just find something that would work, or this film would never be finished, So I gave myself the luxury of time, just looking at all kinds of stuff from the Chicago Film Archives and the Richard J. Daley collection at UIC and the Newberry Library and the Library of Congress and all kinds of other sources, just kind of letting them wash over me and seeing what particular things kind of just stuck with Barry's material, and how could they sort of be woven together to form a new thing, something that was a mixture of documentary stuff and his sort of impressionistic fictional stuff.
Now, at the end of the film, we get to see inside Barry's apartment, and it is a treasure trove of books and boxes of what I imagine are produced and unproduced, plays and screenplays and works. Did you have access to all of that? Did you go through all of that? Did you try and read everything that you could, or even revisit everything, things you had already known in order to prepare for this film?
One thing that was very helpful from the beginning was keeping a very narrow scope. I really wanted it to be concentrated on, the first 17 or 18 years of his life. I felt that I could do justice to that in a documentary. I think the problem with so many biopics is you can't tell a whole person's story in 2 hours. Maybe if you had a mini series, you could do it that way, but I knew that wasn't possible. So I really did confine myself to those first 18 years. And I didn't care so much about the other work of his that kind of falls outside of that period, or stuff that's really not about his childhood. That helped me just keep a very simple and direct path to the kind of movie that I wanted to tell. Now, that said, I certainly had access to everything I needed to have access to. In fact, Barry shared a lot of his own personal photos from his childhood, and there's some home movies of his that I was able to incorporate in the film. So that was definitely a big help.
Was there anything that like unpublished works or anything that surprised you kind of going through that, material that fell within the boundaries of that time period that you just were unaware that existed? And what was something that maybe a revelation that kind of blew your mind?
Well, there were a couple discoveries which were just made me giddy with joy. One of them was Barry went to school at Clinton School, which of course is still a CPS school. It's in West Rogers Park. Trivia note, he went to Clinton School with Gene Siskel. They were the same age.
Wow.
Anyhow, I actually made contact with the current school librarian at Clinton School, and they happened to have a bunch of boxes from that time period. And, I was looking through the boxes, trying to see maybe there's a class photo I can use or something like that. And I came across some copies of the student newspaper. And lo and behold, there was one of Barry's very first published works, I think he was about 10 or 12. I can't remember exactly. He was the sports reporter for the school newspapers. So he wrote a sort of play-by-play over what the coming basketball season might be like. So that was one great discovery I made. Another great discovery, which is one of my favorite moments in the film, was this police training film that was made by the Daley administration in the late 50s. And in the film, this traffic cop pulls over this woman who tries to bribe him. And of course, in the original training film, the lesson is supposed to be you shouldn't take bribes as a cop. But in reality, Chicago was renowned for its corruption. So
What?
yeah, that hasn't changed at all, has it? So anyway, when I found this clip, I was like, oh, this is awesome. And I just stuck it in there kind of as is. It's just such a beautiful document of that time.
You know, it occurs to me that the way that that segment ends, it is kind of ambiguous as to the end of that transaction.
Exactly.
Actually, I want to mention something because in the intro to American Falls, which is the short story collection I was reading, it opens with a recollection of Barry from when he was 10 years old. And there's also a story early on in your film when he's talking about being 10 years old. That seems to be, in addition to the sports writing stuff, a very pivotal age for him. That seemed to be the age when he discovered, like, I want to tell stories. And, later on there's discussion about going to see 2 to 3 movies a day at these movie palaces, and that forming his idea of narrative. In talking with him, not necessarily just for the documentary, but just about his life, did you get a sense of why that particular decade mark? What was the lightning strike for that?
I think, it's a number of factors. One is at age 10 or 11 or 12, you're still capable of having that sort of childhood wonder about things. You're still forming your identity, but at the same time, you're old enough to sort of have the ability to form a notion of what the world is like and what interests you about the world. Beyond that, his father died fairly rapidly after a short illness when he was age 12. His father had cancer. And from then on, his mother was in a series of unsuccessful relationships. I think she was married a total of 4 or 5 times during her life. And as a result, Barry sort of had a solitary childhood in a lot of ways. He was sort of left to his own devices. He sort of had to make his own entertainment. And one thing he did a lot, in addition to going to the movies, was he would watch, these movies on late night TV all by himself, which, when you're that age, creates a certain wonderful mood. I remember I was about 12 when I saw Night of the Living Dead for the first time by myself, which happened to be on TV. And that's an experience I'll never forget, So I think all of these things just conspired to sort of fire a spark in his brain to make him realize that he did want to be a storyteller.
As far as the kind of the evolution of him, as a storyteller, he seems to have a very vivid recollection of his family life. And I know that he channeled that through the character of Roy in these stories, hence the term, the title Roy's World. But there's several references throughout the movie to fiction and why fiction is important. So you get the idea that he's telling fictitious stories, but there doesn't, and I don't know Barry Gifford. I don't know a lot about his life, obviously, but it seems so honest that it's almost as if he is just telling his own autobiographical stories, but the only fictitious element is perhaps some of the names have changed. Is that the impression that you got, or was there more fiction in his work than he might let on?
I think it goes beyond that. I think part of the reason he created Roy and Roy's mother, Kitty, who is, a sort of fictional stand-in for his own mother, is he could incorporate a lot of his memories or impressions from when he was a kid. But, you don't have to be a slave to the facts. That's what fiction is. You make it up. You take some inspiration from real life or from real memories, and you do your own thing with it. And it gives you a lot of freedom to sort of, simultaneously preserve what that time and place felt like, but also create a sort of fantasia and come up with situations that didn't necessarily happen, but might have happened.
Did you, I guess what I'm trying to get at is, you're making a documentary, which is about, the truth and presenting the reality of someone's life, which can be tricky when that person is writing fiction, and fiction that is based on the truth. So I feel like I'm being incepted right now.
No, not at all. I knew that if I could confuse what is fiction, what is reality, if I could sort of blur that line very early on, that at a certain point, as an audience, you don't really care. Like, was this guy really on the street corner, just like it's mentioned in the story? It's not. Who really cares? It's about what was the truth of that moment? What did it really feel like to be in that time and place? I didn't set out to make a history lesson. And I also didn't set out to make a straight biography of, Barry Gifford went to such and such a school in the year 1962. It was more impressionistic than that.
Yeah. I think very successfully so, because it's the combination of visuals and with the words, the cast that you got to read these words, including, Barry Gifford, really bring them to life in a quite spectacular way that I forgot. And I think that's why I asked my initial question. I forgot several points along the way that this is ostensibly works of fiction. I believe that this could have happened to this person.
Well, that's great. That's wonderful.
I want to ask you, Michael Glover Smith is one of my favorite, local filmmakers, and he's also a producer on this movie. How did you get hooked up with him to produce Roy's World?
Oh, this always makes me laugh whenever I think about this. So Michael and I have been friends for a long time. We first met because we were both writing a lot about film, film criticism. And then he made a couple movies and I made a movie. And when it came time to get serious about making Roy's World, I knew immediately I needed a producer because this was going to be a huge project and really beyond my capabilities. So I called Michael and I asked him for advice. I was like, can you think of somebody who, might be a good producer on this movie? And he thought about it for a week or two. And then he called me up and said, well, I think I should be your producer. And I said, why should I have you as my producer? Number one, you've never produced a movie that was not your own. Number two, you've never made a documentary. So why are you the ideal person? And one by one, he sort of countered all of my objections. And kind of the cherry on top was that he's a huge David Lynch and Barry Gifford fan. And he understood the kind of movie that I wanted to make. So I was like, all right, you can be the producer. And I've never regretted that.
He's also, I think, kind of obsessed with Rogers Park as well. So that's got to help. Yeah.
Yeah, he's lived in Rogers Park a long time. So he did also have that perspective on it as well.
I also noticed another name in the credits. I was kind of surprised to see Elaine Wider Harshman, a contributing producer. Actually, I know Elaine. Through Friends of Friends. But in producing the film, this is your first time making a documentary. It's Michael's first time producing a documentary. What were some of the pitfalls or some of these surprise triumphs you had, things that might have gone smoother than you had ever imagined?
Smoother than I ever would have imagined was the way that the music came together. I knew very early on that I wasn't going to rely on period recordings from the 50s because there was no way I could afford them, for one thing. I wanted an original score, but I also wanted to do it differently. I wanted to work the way that Philip Glass prefers to work, which is he likes to come into a project at the very beginning and start composing and recording based on the idea or based on the script or whatever. So I approached Jason Adashevitz, who is a brilliant composer and player, a jazz player here in Chicago, and shared a lot of the Roy stories with him. He plugged into them immediately. We sketched out some moods that I thought would work in the movie, right? And he wrote about, let's see, 7 or 8 tunes. And then we got some top flight jazz players to come into the studio for a couple of days. And we just recorded these tunes like crazy in all kinds of different versions, you know, slow, fast, different instrumentation. And the end result was I had this amazingly wonderful music library to draw from when I was editing and polishing the script. So when I first put one of the music tracks together with Matt Dillon reading one of the stories, it was just so beautiful. I mean, the creative energy was just fantastic. So that was definitely a lot easier than I ever would have expected it would be. Some of the harder stuff was, and I'm glad you mentioned Elaine because she sort of helped us navigate through some of the legal stuff, because with documentaries, you have to get permission for things, or you have to make sure they're in the public domain and, you know, go through various contracts and licensing agreements, which I'm not going to go into now because everyone would immediately hit the stop button. But so having that support was really important too, because there is a legal minefield for documentarians, but there's also a lot of freedom you have when you're making a documentary that you don't have when you're making a fiction film. And I wanted to take advantage of those as well.
As far as, you know, the history of Chicago, were you like kind of steeped in Chicago lore before this, and this was just a deeper dive, or, you know, was there anything that when you were looking into this and tying everything into Barry Gifford's life that really, you know, shocked you as far as stuff that you learned?
Well, you know, one of the reasons I think you start to make a film is you're curious about things. You don't really know what you're going to find. You're curious to find out what will happen if you go down a particular road. And I knew a little bit about that period of Chicago, but really not too much. Because I mean, you know, we all know about Prohibition and Al Capone and that kind of part of Chicago history. And we also know about the 1968 riots at the Democratic National Convention and that part of Chicago history. But the 50s and early 60s are kind of like underexplored, I think. So part of it was, yeah, I'm curious about this period and I'm curious what I'm going to find. And I think you can make the most wonderful discoveries when you don't really have a preconceived notion of what's out there. You just sort of keep your eyes open and hope that you find some good stuff.
Were there any ideas you had about the city or its character of, you know, especially that time period that you're kind of disabused of certain notions? Were there any big surprises that came out of your research?
I think I was surprised by, I'm not quite sure how to put it, like how provincial Chicago was at that time. You know, it's the second largest city in the US. It's renowned for its corruption. And yet it's very much a city of neighborhoods. I mean, there are families and kids growing up in the city, and parents weren't afraid of letting their kids roam around the way they are today. I mean, Barry could, like, you know, jump on the bus or jump on the L and do whatever the heck he wanted. Basically, he was really into sports as a kid, so he was playing baseball, basketball, football all over town. And parents just weren't really protective about their kids in the same way that we are now. So, on the one hand, you had like strip joints and people running the numbers and gangster shootouts and stuff. But on the other hand, there's just a bunch of kids, playing ball in the alley. It's just a really cool dichotomy, and I was kind of surprised by that.
I was surprised just by how colorful, I was surprised by everything because I didn't know Barry Gifford, but by his parents. We spend a lot of time in the beginning looking into not so much his childhood, but who his parents were as people. A lot of biopics or documentaries, they kind of focus on the subject, but what I liked about your approach is you established that the most important relationship in his life was with his mother, and kind of exploring how he came to be. She was this like a fur coat model who got connected with this. He's not exactly a gangster, Rudy Stein, but he is, a bookie. He's got this soda fountain / drugstore where there's illicit stuff going on in the basement. They're living out of these hotels. It was just such an unconventional life. How much of that did you know from reading the Roy books versus learning about that talking to Barry?
Very early on, then this really fit in with my initial conception of the movie. I flew out to Berkeley, where Barry lives, and I hung out with him for about 3 days and just conducted a long freewheeling audio interview with him using a really good mic and my digital recorder, because I knew that I wanted to be able to use some of this in the film. And ostensibly it was an interview, but really it was just like kind of, going through what he remembered from that time. And just the level of detail and the sort of colorfulness of the period. I'm really glad I captured that, because there was a lot that was surprising there, and it helped me to find my way not only into presenting his stories, but also into sort of getting a feel for the historical backdrop of that time.
Was there anything, and I imagine, talking for 3 days with someone about their life, you get a lot of, great stories and a level of intimacy. Was there anything that he was uncomfortable with having put into the film? Not that I want you to tell, it's kind of an odd question to ask. Like, tell me the stuff that you couldn't tell. No, but was there anything that kind of like ideas or kind of categories of things that you were like, we should stay away from that?
He really didn't have veto power over anything. There was like some kind of nasty family drama from his childhood, which I wouldn't have put in the film anyway, because it wasn't really relevant to the kind of fictional documentary blending that I was trying to do. So there was that, but I mean, that's not stuff that I wanted to use, really.
You mentioned that the film does take us up to ages like 16 or 17, and it ends with, as much of a love letter as it is to Chicago, for all of its, great parts and faults. He does kind of mention that he, couldn't wait to get out of there or out of here. I'm in Chicago as well, as Chicago adjacent, so I love this town. But I don't know exactly where he went after this. Did he ever return, home, or did he just kind of like, this is great for 17 years, and I'm just never coming back?
I mean, he's certainly visited Chicago a number of times over the years, and of course, really excited to be having him at the Music Box for the screening there. But really, Chicago was part of his formative years, but he knew that he wanted to see more. He wanted to see everything. He wanted to get different kinds of experiences. And he didn't ever feel the need to move back here. Now, also, his father died when he was 12. Later on, his mother moved away from Chicago anyway. So aside from some friends, he didn't really have any reason to move back. So yeah, I mean, he's done all kinds of things. He worked unloading produce trucks early on because that gave him enough time to write. You know, he's worked with practically every filmmaker you can think of. I mean, one of my favorite games to play with him is I'll just like throw out some name of somebody from the last 40 years, and invariably he'll have a great anecdote about, you know, the time he met up with this person at a cafe in Paris or something like that.
Which brings to mind the question, we kind of touched on this earlier. You can't encapsulate one person's life into 2 hours. Your film is an hour and 15 minutes around there. Is there any thought about exploring, you know, Barry's life after Chicago, like a middle chapter?
I don't know. We'll see. I'm not sure that let's just put it this way. I don't want to do the same thing twice. Making Roy's World was difficult enough, and I am not going to, you know, hazard a failure by trying to step into the same river twice. So certainly the rest of his life is every bit as fascinating as his first 18 years, but I don't know what that would look like, to be honest.
And one thing that is another kind of recurring theme in the film is toughness. Not only the kind of having to shield himself against some of the tumultuous things that were happening, you know, with his parents and his kind of home life or his various homes, but also just sort of the character of Chicago. Did you get a sense that that's something that prepared him well for living and journeying other places, or do you think he was maybe tempered a little too harshly in the Windy City?
No, absolutely. I mean, yeah, I mean, he grew up with Chicago street smarts, which will really serve you well no matter what you do. I mean, for God's sake, being in the entertainment business for, you know, 30 or 40 years, you got to have a tough skin. I mean, all the projects of his that are wonderful that just fell apart because some, you know, jerk or slimy character put the kibosh on it. I mean, that could fill a whole book by itself. And he's really developed a very I don't know if cynical is the right word. He's very pragmatic and realist about the way the world works. So, you know, a movie like Lost Highway or Wild at Heart, I mean, it's amazing that something like that can be produced despite all of the chaos and ugliness in the entertainment world. And then there's all the movies that, you know, never come to be, or they just don't turn out right. And it's just like, well, we'll just move on to the next thing.
Lastly, what is there something that's sort of in you that responds to Barry Gifford's writing? Like what do you think is the most personal touchstone you have to that work?
What I really love about Barry's work is there's no pretension whatsoever, especially in the Roy stories. I mean, these stories are a few pages long. Some of them are like 2 pages long. He gets in, he makes the point he wants to make, and then it's over. But even more beautiful than that is the more of these tiny little stories you read, the more they sort of become a larger mosaic, a bigger thing, almost like, you know, a Robert Altman movie or something, all these tiny little things that cohere into a larger unit. And I really love that as well. He's not a slave to this sort of A, B, C, D, E, F method of storytelling. It's really more of a cumulative thing. And I've always felt attracted to those kinds of stories. And I hope that I was able to capture a bit of that in my own film.
Cool. Well, congratulations on Roy's World, Barry Gifford's Chicago. it is going to be playing as part of the 8th Annual Chicago Critics Film Festival this coming weekend. That's Saturday, November 13th at 2:30 p.m., I believe, the historic movie palace. I'm excited to be part of that. And you're going to be there doing a post-screening Q&A. And as you mentioned, you're bringing Barry Gifford himself. That's pretty exciting. What are you expecting when you get up on that stage with Barry? What can we expect?
It's going to be super exciting because I'm picturing the audience. It's going to be like 50% hardcore David Lynch fans and like 50% people who grew up in Barry's neighborhood and have no idea who David Lynch is. And I'm really excited to see those two kinds of people mixed together. So we're going to have some of his books available for sale. He's going to be autographing them. And we're also going to have a special limited edition movie poster for sale. So it's just going to be awesome. I can't wait to see the movie on the giant screen at the Music Box. It's just the perfect place to debut it in Chicago.
Have you had a chance to see the film on a big screen with an audience?
Well, we had our world premiere at the Glasgow Film Festival on February 28th, 2020, which, as you can imagine, was right before everything started to fall apart.
Yes.
So I had a beautiful little taste of the film festival life. It was a wonderful screening, amazing people at the festival, really enthusiastic audience. It was a great, also technically a great screening. And then the world kind of shut down. So we're getting to the Music Box a little later than we would have liked, but we're getting there at last.
Yeah, and I imagine you were probably in the same place as a lot of filmmakers all over the world in the thick of this pandemic, wondering, am I ever going to be able to watch my movies on a big screen again, or is everything going to be shut down? So yeah, I think it's going to be a very exciting afternoon. Congratulations again. I will see you at that screening, I'm sure. And yeah, for folks out there who want to attend, you can get your tickets and full festival passes to the Chicago Critics Film Festival at chicagocriticsfilmfestival.com. There'll be a link in the description. Also, there'll be links to Barry Gifford's works, and also Rob, Christopher, anything that you want to plug or promote, we'll have that down there. Is there anything that now that I have you here, do you want to plug or promote?
No, just get to the screening if you can. It really means a lot to us as filmmakers to actually present our work in front of a live audience, as opposed to just like somebody watching it on their phone, which is not really the same. So we have a beautiful 5.1 surround sound mix, which is going to sound great at the Music Box. So I really hope to see you there. And thanks, Ian. It was been great to talk with you.
Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you, sir, and have a wonderful evening.
Okay, you too.
All right, take care.